Welcome to Guns, Gear, and Guns with Gary Gunderson. I am Gary Gunderson. Michigan gun owners are in for a slew of new gun laws. The first of which were signed by Governor Whitmer on the Michigan State campus Thursday, politically grandstanding on the still warm bodies of the deceased from a recent shooting.
Lifeless eyes, black eyes like a doll's eye.
The two topics of the laws signed were for safe storage and universal background checks. You will be required to store firearms left unattended on premises where there is a minor or it is reasonably known that a minor is likely to be there. They will be required to be in a locked box or container or unloaded with a locking device such as a trigger lock. What are the consequences of these violations? Well, it depends on what the minor does with the firearm. If they possess or exhibit the firearm in a public place or in the presence of another in a careless, reckless, or threatening manner, the owner of the firearm will have committed a misdemeanor and will be subject to up to 93 days in prison, a fine up to $500, or both. If the minor discharges the firearm and inflicts any injury upon themselves or others, that is a felony charge, meaning the owner will no longer be able to possess any firearms and are also subject to imprisonment up to 5 years, a fine up to $5,000, or both. If the injury inflicted results in a severe impairment of a body function, that jumps up to 10 years, up to a $7,500 fine, or both. And finally, if the minor's actions with the firearm leads to the death of themselves or others, the firearm owner is subjected to a felony that can carry up to 15 years in prison, a fine up to $10,000, or both.
Suave, suave. ¿Por qué no las dos?
What's particularly disturbing here is the self-inflicted harm, meaning you could send your parents to the pokey for unaliving yourself as one final act of teenage rebellion. These penalties are pretty big, tantamount to shooting people personally, and this is an absurd overreach that would not survive the Supreme Court's decision on the Bruins case, as there is no historical precedent for this type of law. There are exceptions built into this law because gun grabbers want to appear reasonable, but they are all also absurd. For instance, the exception that allows hunting with permission of the guardian. But what if they then use that firearm to hurt themselves or others? If you are really wanting to commit an act of evil and your family has firearms and you've hunted before and are like 17, why would they not give you permission to use it to go hunting? I don't see any language about reasonably assuming they are going to commit crimes with the firearms, because if they did, they obviously would not give permission. There is also an exception if the minor unlawfully enters the premises where the firearm has been stored and uses it, but the definition of premises does not pertain to the locked box or trigger lock. At least it is not specifically mentioned. Most home safes are actually fairly easy to break into if you're left alone with it for any length of time. So presumably, if your child is left home alone and your firearm is locked up to the letter of the law and they break into it, you could still be at fault, at least from the strictest interpretation of this law. And one more exception I want to point out, and the question that comes to mind first when I hear about these laws: self-defense. There is an exception allowing a minor to use a firearm while lawfully acting in self-defense or defense of another. If you haven't thought of the issue with this exception yet, give it a second. In order to use a firearm in self-defense, they would need the capability to access the firearm. There's no way this exception could be used unless the law is essentially not being followed in that household already. Otherwise, the minor could not access the firearm when they need it. It's not likely that they would be home alone, someone breaking in, and they call their parents asking for the number to the safe. This law has been brewing since a shooting where a high schooler who was gifted a pistol by his parents killed some of his classmates, and the parents may be charged with involuntary manslaughter for their child's actions, even though this law was not in place. Part of the reasoning here is apparently because he drew quote-unquote disturbing drawings, and the parents should have known that meant he was going to shoot people. Listen, I'll level with you, I drew extremely disturbing things in school. In an art class, I heard the resource officer was coming to meet with a student due to their drawings, and I thought, uh-oh, it me, who had drawn an image with multiple corpses. But no, it was some other kid who did a big 420 drawing, so no worries there. I was never a threat. Who's to say whose art is appropriate or not? The other law is expanding background checks to be universal. Michigan already required universal background checks for all pistols, but now that has been extended to all firearms. The majority of firearms sales were already being done via background checks because that's how it is nationally, due to this being a requirement if you have a federal firearms license, and the shootings in question did not have firearms that were obtained without background checks. But this is a talking point they always harp on and point to like it's the body snatchers. In Michigan specifically, if you do not have a concealed carry license and are purchasing a firearm privately, you will have to go get a permit from your local police, which will involve a background check, making extra hoops and meaning most private sales probably won't be bothered with and just use regular FFLs anyways. And that's not all. There is a red flag law coming to Michigan as well, and she has already said she will sign it. The proposed red flag law, of course, removes firearms from law-abiding gun owners without due process, and for Michigan's bill, you have to prove that you deserve to have the things you legally obtained and have a right to own, starting off with a presumption of guilt and trying to prove your innocence. If these sorts of violations do not make your blood run cold in face of an uncaring bureaucracy, I don't know what will. Even if these storage laws or other laws are eventually overturned, it will take years. And who knows how many gun owners will be charged with these draconian penalties and silly laws in the meantime. So always be sure to vote in your local elections and put in place the least bad option out of the bunch. That's all for today. Please share the video, like it, and subscribe to the channel if you aren't already. We are nearing 5,000 subscribers, which is pretty cool, and consider supporting me on Patreon. Thanks for watching.